Hi, this is Anthony Guardia. I'm here at the WCAT studios doing our regular candidate interviews that have become a little bit of a tradition here. Before I even begin, if you watch the other ones, you know what I'm going to say. Thank you to WCAT for putting this together. I'm lucky enough to work in quite a few different communities. No public access channel that I've ever seen does as much work than WCAT to get events out there, to get things like this out there, and that go out of their way to put it together. And I want to make it clear, I'm not the one organizing this. I'm not the one who picks it. Credit has to go to the WCAT Executive Director, Ian McDermott, who goes out of his way to coordinate the logistics, coordinate the schedules, coordinate the staff, in what I imagine is not an easy job to get all these people together. So with that said, we're going to ask the candidate. Today we have Jonathan Chine's questions, and we are going to start with the most difficult question. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start with, can you introduce yourself and tell that camera right there why you're running for re-election?
Absolutely. So thank you very much, first of all, for having me, and thank you for WCAT. I'm Jonathan Chines. I am running for my third term on the Wakefield Town Council, and I am just absolutely delighted to be here, and absolutely delighted to ask for your vote to continue serving. I am really proud of what we've accomplished in Wakefield, not only in the last 6 years that I've served, but really before then as well, thanks to the great work of hundreds and hundreds of volunteers over the decades. And I think we still have a lot of exciting opportunities for us ahead. I look at the fact that, we're building a new high school, we're investing in our future in that way. There's so many things that we can think about as we go forward in terms of improving our roads and sidewalks, continuing to look at investments in our other schools. We have a new town administrator that will be coming on board. That's one of the most important things that the town council does, and I think that requires a lot of excitement and energy and insight from members of the town council. Looking forward to being part of that process, and looking forward to continue to work with my colleagues on the council, the residents in town, to make sure that we take the steps we need to improve the quality of life here in Wakefield.
No, Jonathan, thank you. And with that said, if you heard the other interviews, most of the questions, again, nothing scientific. I just usually survey friends and family who tend to read the item, follow the community groups, and be involved in town. And I'm going to start with the first question that kudos to Doug Butler, who brought this up when I had asked last year, what is one issue that you think is going to come up that nobody's talking about? He said Steve Mayo's retirement. Mm-hmm. We just talked about he's been here for 17 years, which means you could have run 5 times.
Yep.
And never have the vote that you're going to have coming up. So I guess my question to you is, what are you looking for in the next town administrator? What do you think they can improve on? What do you think they can continue doing? And do you have an ideal process you'd like to see put in place?
Sure. So that's a great question, and I think
thank you.
Thank you to Doug too.
Yeah.
This is, I think, the most important decision that a town council makes. We hire very few people directly. The one that we hire that really is critical is the town administrator, and we've been incredibly lucky. Not only is Steve long tenured, but he is one of the most accomplished town administrators in the state. When I tell people I'm from Wakefield that I meet from other towns, they say, oh, that's Steve Mayo's town. He does a great job. And it's absolutely true. And, we had Tommy Butler in place for a long time before then. We've had incredible stability. And so as I look at some of the things that I'm looking for as we go through this process, I think there are really 4 key elements. The first is someone who understands town finances and the fiscal challenges facing cities and towns. This is the area where I think Steve really distinguished himself, is that he understood in a very visceral and very sort of deep way exactly how municipal finance works. And that is the biggest part of the job, is managing the budgets and helping to kind of make sense, especially in a time like this where state and federal funding is under threat. You have changes in the tax base between commercial and residential properties. You need someone who really kind of intuitively gets that. So that's the first thing that I'm looking for, is someone who has that set of skills. The second thing that's really important is someone who is a solid people manager. So the town administrator is the chief operating officer of a community that employs hundreds and hundreds of people. You need to have someone who really understands how to run an organization, how to set goals for their team, how to hire the right people, and mentor their folks to do well and to bring on people as well. if we don't have the right people working in town government, town services suffer. And so, that's a second critical element of what we're looking for. I think a third is someone who also has sort of a lowercase p political sense about them, someone who understands how to interact with the public, how to be accessible to people. I mean, this is a very visible job. And it's a job where, as much as, I'll get comments and other folks on the council will get comments and questions based on what's happening in town, the town administrator will as well. And so they need to be able to talk about the issues facing the town. They need to be able to respond in an empathetic and a transparent way to members of the public. And that needs to be something that they model for the team as well. And then I think finally, I'm looking for someone who has passion for this. This is a hard job. It's a very involved job. Sometimes it's a 24/7 job. It's a job that you can't do as a side project. It's a job that you can't do unless you're really committed to it. And so what I want to see is someone who comes in with the passion, with the energy, and with the motivation to really make this job their own and to work with the town council and the other leaders in town to really put their stamp on Wakefield.
No, wonderful, wonderful. And I think to follow up on that, the second part, and you kind of spoke about it with the financial management, the second issue I'm hearing quite a bit about is cost of living in town, but specifically is overrides, because we are surrounded by them. Melrose had an override that just failed. Stoneham has a $14 million override coming up. I think Mayor Dolan, Town Administrator Dolan in Linfield said he's looking, I think, at a $2 million override, but don't hold me to that. I think North Reading or Reading just had one that failed.
Yep. Medford recently had one as well.
So we're surrounded by communities that are having overrides. Luckily, Wakefield doesn't seem to be there yet. So I guess my question to you is, as a town councilor, how do we try to maintain services, either at their level or grow them, while at the same time balancing these cost of living concerns? And do you foresee the need for an override anytime soon?
Yeah. So first of all, how do we maintain balance in the budget? And this is where I think we in Wakefield have done a really good job of having a solid, evidence-based set of best practices that we've documented in our fiscal policies that we've also continued to expand upon and follow. So one of the things that I do, as part of my municipal role, is I serve as the chair of the Fiscal Policy Committee for the Massachusetts Municipal Association. And it's a great opportunity because I have the chance to see what other cities and towns are doing, what has worked well and what hasn't, and I have a chance to understand what drives some of the overrides in the other communities. And because of that experience, I feel very confident in saying that we have probably one of the most solid, methodologically rigorous ways of looking at budgeting decisions, tax decisions, and investment decisions in Wakefield that I've seen in almost any community across the Commonwealth. This is a big part of the reason why I think we are in a position where we are not like some of our other surrounding communities in looking at major structural deficits, and that we're not looking at an override. I think we've had the right level of discipline, again, both in kind of following the policies that existed, but also expanding upon them and building upon them to make sure that we're being responsive to the new realities that we face. But those new realities are also challenging. The way that I see it, I think we have a number of sort of existential challenges that are coming up as we look at town finances. One is the fact that costs are going up. The cost of labor is the biggest input into costs in Wakefield. Labor costs have increased dramatically as the labor market forces that we see have gotten more challenging. It's harder to hire people. It's harder to retain people. That ultimately affects your costs. Federal and state action are a big issue. And I tell you, one of the things that keeps me up at night right now is what happens if the federal government makes dramatic cuts into programs, particularly in Medicaid. That'll have the effect of putting enough pressure on the state budget that will impact local aid in a pretty significant way, as well as the services that we need to be able to offer to residents.
Just to be clear, I made that point in the first interview with John, so I just want credit for making that point. But it's absolutely right. Anybody who follows,
absolutely,
the people who follow this stuff, and we know. And by the way, can you imagine how nerdy it is that we do follow this stuff? But we love it. It's passion. But you're absolutely right. If there is a major cut in Medicaid, What happens is the state will have to backfill Mass Health, and then therefore removing funds from usually Chapter 70, Chapter 40, and whatnot. Sorry, I cut you off, though.
No,
Please
no,
keep
that's
going.
okay. I think it's a really important point. And the other thing that I would say is that that would also increase the level of services that are demanded for us. So, for example, if you cut Medicaid and access to primary care, access to medical care becomes more difficult, you can very easily see how that leads to, a larger number of 911 calls that stress our police and fire and first responders. Very much see sort of the need for emergency services delivered to some of the unhoused people that we see in Wakefield. So all of the things that we do as a community could be affected by that, and that's another big challenge that's coming up. And I think the third challenge, in addition to labor costs, in addition to state funding, is that we have been seeing for the last 20 years a shift in our tax base. So if you look over time and if you watch our meetings and kind of pay attention when we do our tax classification hearings each year, we talk about this. Commercial property values have been pretty much flat over the last 20 years, while residential property values have gone up and up and up and up. That is the big reason why we've seen such higher increases on the residential tax side than we have on the commercial side. And what concerns me is that in a post-pandemic world where more people are working from home, at some point, I fear that, our commercial real estate segment, the values that we see in those that drive tax assessments will start to go down as we see vacancies in office space. And what then happens is, to make up for that, the balloon gets pushed onto the residential side. So those three things are big concerns. I think they require, first of all, constant vigilance in what we're spending. I think they require creativity in terms of finding new ways to make sure we're delivering services, and also creativity to think about how we are building up our commercial tax base. So we have an economic development officer who does a great job. We have a newly formed economic development council that's supporting the work that she does. But we really need to be focused, and one of the things I want to make sure we double down on, if I'm fortunate to serve enough for another term, is to come up with a commercial development strategy for Wakefield to make sure that we don't backslide in terms of our commercial tax base.
No, well said. And I will say, to your commercial point, I think people forget that there's portions of Edgewater, major commercial space, and there's bigger commercial buildings, even on Albion, that provide to Wakefield. To that point, you've talked about two issues that we're going into, that were talked about in the previous debates last year's and I think the year before. I'll start with the issue that seemed to come up the most by far. And it's definitely a balancing act again. But the term I always hear is overdevelopment. The idea that there's so many condos and so many apartments, and you buy, I'll use the example as somebody mentioned, they bought the laundromat on Albion and put another 6 or 7 units over there. And then the consequences of that, right? The amount of traffic, the amount of people coming into town. I will say the number one complaint was the traffic by far. They blame, I don't know if they're related, I think they are, but that is the number one complaint. I guess as a town councilor, and somebody who's been a town councilor while these developments have been going on, last time specifically the complaints were about Nahant Street and the head of the lake. Now it seemed to be more generalized. What are your thoughts on the development side of things? And how do we try to, at the very least, ease maybe those negative consequences like traffic in town?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting area where I think there are a lot of balancing issues. So on the one hand, we have a housing crisis across eastern Massachusetts, across really probably most of Massachusetts at this point, and Wakefield's no exception to that. I hear from people all the time, young people looking to move into Wakefield that feel like they're priced out. I actually hear from a lot of seniors in Wakefield who are still living in the homes where they may have raised their families that desperately want to downsize and can't find somewhere else to go. And we actually had a really interesting discussion at our town council meeting this past Monday, where we looked at some of the data that will underlie the housing production plan that's being developed right now. And, a lot of these challenges that you see in terms of housing affordability and access were really, really highlighted in just stark relief. I mean, the fact that to afford the median single-family home in Wakefield, you need to have an annual income of something like $270,000 a year. And so we have an enormous housing challenge, again, locally in Wakefield and across Massachusetts, that has been exacerbated by the fact that we really haven't developed as a state a lot of housing over the last 50 plus years. The other issue that we should also be mindful of is we talked about why is Wakefield not facing an override decision as so many other communities have. One of the benefits of the development that we've seen is that that has added new growth into the tax base that has allowed us to be able to sustain some of the financial decisions and the services we maintain without having to pursue an override. And so there is a greater demand for services, but you also have more revenue coming in, and those are the balances that we have to do. As I have kind of approached this over the years, I've told people the way that I think about it is that you really almost have to take every project on its merits. As an example, we as a town council are sponsoring a local initiative project, which is a so-called friendly 40B for about a 20 to 24 unit development on Salem Street behind the Dunkin' Donuts near Montrose Ave. This was a project where we looked at it, the developer came to us and said, we want to work with the town, we want to get your feedback on what's going to work well, what's going to be appropriate for this neighborhood. And it was a really productive process where they were able to come up with an idea in collaboration with the council, with Councilor Carney working as the liaison with them, to come up with something that had universal support among the 7 of us. And we're a council right now that when it comes to development issues has a pretty wide diversity of opinions. Conversely, you look at Nahant Street where you have sort of the opposite approach, where you have a developer that's come in that hasn't listened to concerns of the neighborhood, that hasn't listened to concerns of the town, and has looked to, or 2 different developers that have looked to put developments in place that, really are far above and beyond what I think any of us would hope for. And there the council has also spoken with one voice around, this isn't what we want to see here. So I think at the end of the day, what we need to do is make sure that we try to strike a balance and find ways to develop housing in Wakefield that starts to address some of these long-standing, really structural needs that we have in terms of making sure that people in Wakefield who want to move here, people who want to stay here, have the option to do so, while also making sure that we're being mindful of the impact on town services. I think some of the developments that have gone up, I'll use an example, I live on Hopkins Street near the Tarrant Lane development. I actually think that's been a really nice addition to our neighborhood. It's served a lot of people, again, particularly people who are retired and have looked for that place to downsize in ways that have been really helpful. It hasn't had much of an impact on my neighborhood. In fact, because of some of the grant money that we've been able to get for some of that project, we're going to be building a sidewalk on that street, which desperately needs it. That's a development that makes sense. Nahant Street, other areas are developments that I think don't make sense. And so at the end of the day, well, as a town councilor, we don't have a say over what gets built and what doesn't get built. That's not part of the scope of what we have responsibility for. That is what I've tried to sort of articulate as I've talked about some of these issues. And that's certainly the standard that I hope the Zoning Board of Appeals and the other decision-making authorities on things would follow.
No, it's true, and to your point, it's such a balance because there was a realtor in Wakefield, a prominent realtor, who mentioned just I think last week there isn't a single family home available in Wakefield, and quite selfishly, my wife and I, when we first started, we bought a condo, 234 Water Street.
Mm-hmm.
That was our first home, and that allowed us we leveraged the condo to buy our first single family.
I did the same thing. My first home was a condominium as well, because that's what you can afford.
So
if you're lucky as a young person.
It's true. With that said, you can easily see me frustrated in the car on Albion Street when I'm trying to get to the Dolbear School, and it's taking me 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So I get it. I totally get it, and it's definitely a balance.
And it's interesting because I think that brings up another issue as well. So one of the things I think we've seen in town that's affected traffic a lot is, the development of traffic apps, right? So I use it when I go to work. I plug into Waze, and it takes me, through whatever community I'm driving through instead of on the highway. One of the things that drives some of those algorithms is that they look at average speeds on roads in town. And so as I think about, how we approach pedestrian safety and road safety in Wakefield, I actually think there's an important element to this of reducing traffic speeds in town, because if we can calm traffic in town, those algorithms that drive those apps are less likely to direct traffic onto local surface streets in Wakefield as opposed to keeping them on 128. And I see, so again, I live on the west side right near 128. I can tell you what the traffic is on 128 based on what Prospect Street looks like from my front porch. That piece of it is figuring out how we can calm traffic, both to make our streets safer for everyone, but also, I think, as a side benefit of keeping some of the app-based traffic off of the streets of Wakefield, I think is another thing that we have to look at that's sort of separate and apart from this development question as we think about traffic impacts.
No, that's a good point. Nobody's brought that up, actually, today, that could be separating the two, because I haven't. So, no, good thinking. And then I guess we'll use your point recently to segue into the next one, which is bike lanes came up quite a bit. Specifically on North Ave, no pun intended here, but there seemed to be 3 lanes, right? One was being against bike lanes, one was being for bike lanes, the third was being for bike lanes, but with the flex poles. What are your thoughts on bike lanes in general, and then specifically on North Ave?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to take a little step backwards from this because I think that bike lanes is shorthand for discussion about a lot of other things affecting pedestrian safety and traffic patterns and so forth. So maybe to kind of give you my philosophy and then talk a little bit about North Ave. My philosophy is that, as a community, one of the things that I am hyper-focused on is safety on our roads. And that's safety for pedestrians. I mean, I am a runner, I am a walker, I have kids. I'm very concerned about making sure that people can walk safely in Wakefield. It's safety for bikers. I'm not a biker myself, but obviously I want to make sure folks are safe there. And it's safety for drivers as well. And so as I look at decisions around roadway use, that's the frame that I look to, is how can we make our roads as safe as possible for all the people that are using them. And I think there's sort of 2 elements to doing that are really important. One is speed. So I talked about speeds from sort of a Waze and an app standpoint in terms of diverting traffic into Wakefield. But speed also does kill. To give you an example, about a year and a half ago, there was a single car accident on my street where the car was basically wrapped around a tree and flipped. And there wasn't another car involved, and it's the sort of thing where you only do that much damage if you're going exceptionally fast on a street that is not designed and should not be designed to carry cars at that speed. Obviously, anytime you have speed involved with a pedestrian or a bike, the implications of that from a safety standpoint are enormous. The second issue is how do we separate uses and kind of reduce conflicts on roads? And so to go to North Ave, that is one of the reasons why we widened the sidewalk on North Ave as a starting point of that project. It was a narrow sidewalk, obviously an incredibly busy street from a roadway standpoint, but also an incredibly busy street from a pedestrian standpoint. And so a big part of the reason why we widened the sidewalk was to make sure that we didn't have people walking in the road as they tended to do. And I, as a runner, was probably one of those people that did that way too often. So separating out kind of the pedestrians from the road traffic. On the bike lane for North Ave, I think one of the things that was interesting to me is for the 2-week period when we had the flex post up, when we were talking about feedback from that time period, during that meeting, Chief Scory said, I'm not sure how I feel about these flex posts. I found when I was driving down North Ave with the flex posts there, I really had to slow down and pay attention. And I love Chief Scory, he is a phenomenal chief, but I ribbed him a little bit afterwards and I said, well, Chief, that's kind of entirely the point, is that we do want drivers to slow down and pay attention. And so to me, that's a big part of the benefit of a bike lane on a street like North Ave. By narrowing the lanes a little bit, by having the flex posts up there, and I really do hope that we install them up there for a full season of testing just to see how it works. It acts to force people to pay closer attention as they're behind the wheel, and in doing so, in slowing down traffic, it ultimately, makes the road safer for everyone involved, including the drivers. I mean, you have a lot of cars pulling in and out of North Ave from side streets, driveways, Lakeside Office Park. Anything we can do to, again, get people to slow down and pay attention is going to be an important net benefit from a safety standpoint. The other thing I will say on it is, this is an area where we can experiment with relatively low impact to the community. You know, the flex posts are temporary. We put them down for a couple of weeks in December. We took them back up. We can do so again. Painting lines on roadways is relatively inexpensive and easy. And so, you know, I'm someone who likes to approach these things from a data standpoint. I'd love to see us try it. I'd love to see us monitor the traffic that we see and the speeds. We actually now have the data to do that through a contract that we have with a vendor that uses GPS data in vehicles to measure speeds and traffic. And I'd like us to make a data decision based on that. And I think that's where we'll ultimately come up with the best approach for the community.
Understood. And then last issue question. And like I said, there's way more issues than I'm talking about, but again, these were, I would say, the top 5 that came up. And again, not scientific. It's not like I polled 500 people or anything, but you know, my little survey, and I hope I'm doing a good job. But it's an issue that's come up ever since I've been involved, and probably every year that you've been involved, and that is our downtown. So people still want to know, how do we revitalize downtown Wakefield? To a certain extent, you know, I'm happy to see, and I think people were happy to see Indy Clover. And I'm biased, Inspire Cafe.
I'm very happy to see that too.
But there are the ongoing complaints about Molise, the former Molise building. I know we just had Stacy said some of them were housed, but you know, the unhoused population in downtown Wakefield and the vacant storefronts in Wakefield. So Jonathan, I guess what has been done in your time to improve it? What do you think we can do going forward to improve our downtown?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm really proud of is the fact that we do have money that we've put towards downtown development and facade improvement. And actually, this came out of the conversations we were having with regard to the investment the town made in Inspire Cafe. Early on in that process, I was talking to then Councillor Ann Danahy about, you know, could the town invest some of our ARPA money in this cafe, which we ultimately did, and it's incredible that we did, because I think that's an amazing anchor business and anchor establishment for downtown. But in the course of those conversations, you know, I said to Ann at one point, you know, it would be great if we could come up with a way to kind of formalize some of these investments and you know, expand some of these investments, not just for this one organization, but for other businesses in town. Because what I've seen is that a lot of businesses who are incredibly committed to the community, it's hard to find the capital to make investments in, you know, having new signs, improving their facades, making accessibility investments, and so forth. And so if there is some way that we could, through, you know, kind of a micro-grant lending program or actual grants themselves, that there's some way that we could support that work, you know, we thought that that would be a good investment. And so that ultimately did come to pass, where we at the Town Council allocated $1 million of our ARPA funds into that fund. We've had tremendous interest from businesses in the community in terms of taking advantage of that, and so some of those grants are going to start to be flowing out over the next couple of months. But I think that's one piece where we can support our businesses and also create an environment in downtown that looks and feels welcoming to everyone. The second comes down to recruiting the right mix of businesses in downtown, and I think you highlighted a couple of great examples. Obviously, Inspire Cafe, I've been amazed, you know, when I've been in there in the few weeks that it's been open, it is always packed. It's drawing people to Wakefield. Tell me about it.
We're very happy.
It's awesome. It's drawing people. I mean, it's awesome for Inspire, but it's also drawing people to downtown that otherwise wouldn't be here. I mean, I see people coming from out of town. I saw a Facebook post from my cousin who lives in Tewksbury who came down to see it.
Yeah, and I said North Shore Eats had a post about a bunch of people who came down. Yeah.
You mentioned Indy Clover. That's another great example, because, you know, it's the type of establishment where every time you go in, it's something different, right?
And to your point, to give credit to Indy Clover, I had a bunch of friends who were from Stoneham, and they said, oh, we take our daughters thrift shopping here.
Yeah. It's, you know, one of the things that I think we have to be mindful of is that in an environment where everything's available online, as you think about like retail establishments that can be like permanent anchor tenants in a downtown, they have to be offering something different that you can't get online. And Indy Clover's a great example of that. We've had some other amazing businesses come downtown. The Boba Tea House, my daughter was there today after school. They had a half day and she and her friends walked down there, and that's drawing a clientele. The Brazilian bakery that we have downtown has been doing great business. So we're starting to see, I think, a diversity of really interesting businesses that have created a vibe in downtown Wakefield that I think is new and different and unique and is drawing people there. And one of the things that I think happens is that when you have success in a downtown area, success feeds on success, and lack of success, unfortunately, also feeds on lack of success. I think that because of the investments we've made in downtown and because of this program that we created, that I'm really proud to be part of, and I'm so grateful for Councillor Danahy to be part of that. Councillor Dombrowski came up with a similar idea that we synthesized into it. I think that we've got a lot of momentum downtown right now. I think we've got a really committed group of volunteers in our Economic Development Council who's focused on supporting town efforts and bringing businesses into town, and I think we're going to continue to see that bear fruit over the next couple of years. What we don't have, and again, this goes back to kind of the economic development, commercial development strategy, is we've done a lot of these things probably in a little bit of a scattershot way, and they've been good things to do, and I think we're seeing some success. I think the next step for us is to wrap all of that together into a cohesive strategy so that it's not just one-off interventions, but something that's part of a coherent plan around how do we expand economic development in town, both at places like Edgewater Office Park, but also for our business communities, whether it's business districts, whether it's downtown or Greenwood or wherever else in the community.
No, well said. And well, Jonathan, we get to my favorite questions now.
Yeah.
These are the questions I created. So we'll say these are more open-ended, but the question we asked last year, again, that Doug nailed was, is there something that you think is going to come up in your next term that we're not talking about, that isn't in the item, that isn't in the Facebook community groups?
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit, so it's not something we haven't talked about, but I do think the financial picture is going to get more challenging in the next couple of years. Because of all the factors we talked about, because of the possibility of federal action, and it's going to affect us in ways that I don't think we can sort of anticipate right now. So for example, we talked about Medicaid impacting the number of emergency calls we receive. Those are the types of things that you have to dig 2, 3, 4 levels deep in terms of the issues that are out there to really understand. And so that's one thing that I think is going to face us in the next couple of years. I think the housing crisis, unfortunately, is going to get more challenging before it gets better, because it does take a long time for the housing market to catch up with some of the things that the state has done to try to improve housing production in Massachusetts. I think it will take us a while to kind of get through that hump. But the good news is that I think we have some tremendous opportunities in that area. So we have town-owned property on Butler Ave that we've been looking at from a residential development standpoint, something there we could do sort of a low-density neighborhood, if you will, where we're able to provide senior housing and supportive housing for low-income individuals in the community. We have some other parcels of land in town, including the Hurd School, where they really present a canvas for us to think kind of differently and creatively in terms of how we address some of these housing challenges. And I think that's really exciting. I think, we're so fortunate that we have the ability to be able to think creatively about how we address some of these challenges with some resources and with some properties in town that, don't necessarily exist in other communities.
That's true. And then the other question I always ask is, can you give us an example of when you changed your mind?
I can give you a number of examples of when I changed my mind.
Just one, Jonathan.
One of the harder decisions very recently that we've had to come through, I'll give you 2 examples because I think they're both relevant. One was when we were talking about the renovations to the senior center. So I am so excited that we've been able to renovate the 3rd and 4th floors of the senior center, actually make that space usable. It's going to be an amazing resource, both to the seniors in our community, but to the community at large. It's incredible space that just was sitting vacant for storage until we put some money in there. But one of the issues that was challenging was we have a lot of really big, really old windows in that building, and there was the question of what we do with those. And I heard from a lot of residents. I spent a lot of time in the senior center with Karen Burke, the director of the center, like literally physically opening and closing windows to try to understand the challenges. And we ultimately made the decision to replace the old wooden windows with a modern composite material. And, I continue to hear from people. I was at the Permanent Building Committee meeting last night and heard from some of the folks there after the meeting closed. I can't believe you guys did that. And, that's a valid concern. And that was something even during that meeting where I probably changed my mind 3 or 4 times during the course of the discussion because it was a hard call. Another example, the MBTA Communities Compliance Plan that came in front of town meeting in November. I will tell you, I'm not a fan of that plan. I don't think it actually went far enough to address some of the housing issues in town. But at the end of the day, I also feel that it was important to pass a plan so that we were in compliance and weren't putting state money at risk. And so, that's an example where, I came to support it. It wasn't the plan that I would have drafted if I was doing it on my own, but so often in doing this, you have to make pragmatic decisions around what's in the best interest of the community. And to me, having a plan that could pass, even if it's not ideal, was ultimately was the underriding concern that we had to address.
No, understood. All right, my more fun questions.
Yeah.
What's your favorite movie?
What is my favorite movie? Probably Apollo 13. So I love space movies.
Good movie.
I went to fake space camp as a kid. I say fake space camp because it wasn't the one in Alabama, but it was the traveling one that came to my middle school.
Concord, New Hampshire that my son loves.
I've been there. Yep, the Christa McAuliffe Planetarium.
Yeah, my son loves that place.
So Apollo 13 is a movie I could watch almost every day. I mean, it's still every time hearing the music and seeing the movie, it makes me happy every time.
No, it's a great movie. I think there's a great line in there where he says, "Well, what if Christopher Columbus stopped after he discovered the New World? We just didn't go back." And I think that's a great line.
Well, and the line too, failure is not an option.
Yeah.
And I think about that when I think about town stuff, because when you look at that movie and how they survived this crisis, they tried a bunch of different things and they kind of thought through things on the fly. And that's a lot of what we do in town government is you're faced with the less than ideal solutions, you're faced with complicated choices, and you have to make it work.
I'm picturing Steve Mayo yelling at Joe Conway right now.
Yeah, failure is not an option, Joey.
Yeah. Number 2, favorite book.
My favorite book, I'm a big fan of Zadie Smith, and my favorite book is still her debut novel, White Teeth, although everything that she's written, I've just eaten
Great book,
up.
by the way. Great book. Favorite song?
My favorite song, so I'm gonna embrace my inner 90s child. These Are Days by 10,000 Maniacs.
That's a great set. Favorite band?
Favorite band right now, I would say is Guster. So I should say I actually went to Tufts for undergrad, which is where Guster came from, but I continue to be amazed at how they evolve and grow as their career's gone on. It's been pretty cool to see.
And last but not least, favorite TV show?
Favorite TV show? I'm a West Wing fan, which probably doesn't surprise anyone who knows me. But I still, especially now when our politics are so fraught, I still go back to some of those episodes, and it just makes you feel good about what government can do.
Do you think President Barrett would have beat President Trump in this past election?
Oh, I think President Barrett would have beaten anyone in the last few elections.
True. And all right, very final question, maybe the second hardest question. Do you mind looking into that camera and telling the people of Wakefield why they should vote for you?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you again, Anthony, and thank you to WCAT. Look, I'm really proud of what we've done in Wakefield. When I ran 6 years ago for the first time, I talked about investing in our future. I talked about improving the quality of life, and I talked about making sure that we had a government in Wakefield that was responsible and also responsive and transparent to residents. And we've made amazing strides there. But as I said at the beginning, there's still so much more that we can do, there's still much more that we should do, and there's still much more that I want to do. I'm really proud that we have a new high school coming up next to this, but again, we have other buildings in town that we need to come up with plans to invest in. We've improved our sidewalks, we've made some incredible quality of life improvements in Wakefield, but there's still more that we can do. And finally, again, we have a really generational decision coming up on the town council in terms of selecting a new town administrator. I've been leaning in onto these issues for the last 6 years. I love doing this work and try to approach every issue with wisdom and by studying each side and coming up to the right decision. I am really excited and really passionate about continuing to do the work and continuing to make sure that we can improve the community. And I do ask for your vote on April 22nd.
I do want to just jump in real quick, Jonathan. If people saw me with my phone, it has been buzzing nonstop, and I'm like, what is going on? And the reason is because there is a group chat with all of the Inspire staff, and they are talking about how excited they are to go to work And,
Oh,
that
that's
was
incredible.
such a nice note. So with that said, well, Ed, thank you to WCAT, and good luck.
Thank you.
Jonathan, I think, yeah, I think you're going to win. I don't know, I have a feeling. So, Jonathan, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you for what you do, Anthony.
No, thank you.